Well, good morning, Dykema. It's great to spend some time with you all. This is absolutely the coolest stage I've ever had the opportunity to present on. We're going to spend the next 15 minutes diving into some data. And as Brian mentioned, about 2 years ago, we started to release a first of its kind industry outlook report. First of its kind because it was DSO specific. 2 years ago, we released the first, a year ago, the second, and then this year we did something different. We did what we called an industry deep dive. Actually looking at the data, looking at the metrics, and seeing what correlates to growth. Not just standalone metrics like case acceptance percentage or hygiene reappointment rates, though we certainly have those as well, but what are some of the levers that are showing indicators for successful practices growing within DSOs? So first off, a little context about the data and why it's unique and why it's important. This data is from over 350 DSOs. In fact, Planet DDS today serves 26 of the top 50 DSOs in the country. When I say serves, I don't mean these DSOs accidentally acquired a Denticon practice and now we're serving that DSO. I mean, these were executive leadership decisions to migrate and standardize on a Denticon or the Cloud9 platform. We have over 1,700 groups with over 100 locations represented in the data set, over 25 from 75 to 100, and another 50 groups between the 25 and 75 location count. There's also, in addition to that, another couple hundred organizations, small group practices, emerging groups from 2 to 19 locations. This data represents data from over 8,500 practices across both Denticon and Cloud9. When we do same-store growth analysis, we're using practices that have been on the platform for a minimum of 2 years in order to make sure that the data is reliable. But what also makes this report unique and this data set unique, aside from it being the largest cloud data set of DSO locations in the country, is that because it's all coming from the same practice management software, the data definitions are consistent, the data dictionaries are normalized, the workflows that put that data into the solutions are consistent, and so you're actually able to get a clear view of what's happening. We're not aggregating data at the top. Another interesting fact that I should share with you all is that 42% of the locations within this data set are $2 million plus from a revenue perspective. VCG, Chris, who was just out on stage recently, released a report on what the distribution of revenue is across practices in the dental industry. And as an industry, only 13% of practices are 2 million plus. Another 27% are in the 1 to 2 million, and there's still a majority that are 1 million or sub 1 million single provider practices in the market today. DSOs obviously are looking for practices that can scale and that can grow. So it makes sense that in our data set, over 42% of the locations are over 2 million, 15% of which are 3 million plus, and another 30% are 1 to 2 million. This is not a survey. This is not asking for information. It's not a sample. This is real production data, anonymized and presented to you. So what does the data say? Well, I'm going to start with some of those standalone metrics that I talked about. We've got case acceptance, average case completion. This is trends from 2024, 2025, and through the first half of 2026. I'm not going to go through all of this, but you'll see that case acceptance has been creeping up year over year. Go back. Case acceptance has been creeping up from 2024 to the first half of 2026. Case completion has been increasing. Our average new patients across the network are increasing. And actually, average daily production by practice is increasing as well. But what does that mean from a year-over-year growth perspective? So BCG also projected 3% growth for the dental industry starting in 2025 and moving forward. We saw last year in our network that the industry grew at 4%. So pretend the Planet DDS is the world's largest DSO. We look at year-over-year results. 4% was what we saw as an average growth rate. So we outpaced the projected 3%. But Plan DDS is not the world's largest DSO. It is made up of 350 different leadership teams, different executive teams, operations teams, clinical teams, all running businesses in a different way. And so when you look at the 4%, it's a little bit misleading. So the distribution of growth across the entire network shows that actually 1 in 3 practices was growing at over 10%, but almost 14% were growing at minus 10%. And a whole slew of practices are getting squeezed there in the mid. In fact, through 2025, we saw that 63% of practices were growing, while 37% were shrinking. But how does that look as we turn into the first half of 2026? I think we all recognize the headwinds that we're facing out there in the market and the industry, and what we see in the first half of 2026 actually reflects that. So, same cut, same story. We're still seeing about 1 in 3 practices growing at over 10%, but now over 20% of practices were declining at 10% or greater, with once again, the middle there getting squeezed. And we saw a softening in the market overall from a 4% average weighted growth to 2.2% through the first half of 2026. So all that being said, where are we seeing growth occur, and what are the metrics that are actually driving growth? Well, the strongest correlation to growth that we could find, the single strongest predictor of growth, was new patient acquisition. And so what we saw is that this 35 threshold, practices that were bringing in 35 new patients a month started to accelerate their growth. Those that were not were struggling. And again, keep in mind the context I gave you at the beginning of the percentage of practices that are $2 million plus, the size of these practices. You may see in other reports that the industry average is 35 new patients a month or 38. That's typically because it's less DSO focused and you get a broader subset of practices. So while we see an average of 46, 35 is really the growth accelerated number. Actually did a case study on this with one of our current clients. They had 30 locations. We were analyzing their business for 2025. 10 of their locations shrank, 20 of their locations grew. They actually outpaced the 4% industry average by a few percentage points. Overall, a very strong business. We were trying to figure out what was going on with the 10 that were shrinking. I said, you know what, let's overlay your new patient acquisition numbers over all of your 30 practices. They had 9 practices in their organization out of their 30 that were at under 35 new patients a month. All 9 of those were part of the 10 locations that were decreasing. And I know there's a notion in dental that you have all the dentistry you need to do inside the 4 walls today, that you don't need to go spend a ton of money on marketing and getting new patients and everything else, that if you just execute flawlessly on your hygiene reappointment rates and your patient activation and your unscheduled treatment plan, that you will grow and succeed. And maybe that is true, but it's really, really hard to do. So we also saw in the report that operational consistency compounds. And I don't think people are really talking about this or looking at it in this way. What we looked at is the volatility from a day-to-day basis. So peaks and troughs throughout the entire course of the year. Say you had a $10,000 production Tuesday, or you averaged 10,000 production on Tuesday, but on Thursdays you're averaging 6,000 in production. That would be considered in this analysis significant volatility. What we saw is that the practices that were the most consistent, day in, day out, owning the schedule, providing the provider hours, the access to care, operationally excellent, actually had 28% more daily revenue than those that had wild fluctuations from one day to the next. And maybe in the most unpopular dental statement, in a relatively small sample size, offices that peaked on Friday, highest growth number on Friday, grew twice as fast on a weighted average than every other practice. I know dental's got Friday issues. I know it's a great day for specialty, but for an industry that extols access to care, there's certainly opportunities there to ensure that we are available when our patients need us. All right, revenue per chair, production per chair. What we saw across the entire network The DSO average was 205,000. This is a blended average, so what you use the chairs for absolutely matters. But where we see growth actually accelerate is at 300,000. The takeaway here is that most practices have capacity to maximize more than they are, and before people are looking to add chairs, operatories, or expand, you should ensure that you dial in your operations, your clinical standard of care, and maximize what you have available to you today. So this was another interesting finding. We actually saw a valley occur in growth as groups crossed into the 25 plus location cap. I was trying to think of what the good explanations for this were. And when Steve was up earlier today on stage and he was talking about an aviator or a captain, it really resonated. I think this is a part of the growth story for many groups where they need less aviators and more captains. It's when people are installing executive leadership teams, they're first building operations, they've likely outgrown their systems, their processes. They might not be standardized on a single platform. It's still very much the Wild West. They're still defining their standard of care. And so this is the maturity phase for many groups that struggle, that are having success prior. They enter this window of size. They have a challenge in growing, and then once they get to the other side, they can start to grow again. And finally, I want to talk about case acceptance. This might be very counterintuitive because we all talk about case acceptance as almost this holy grail of growth. You can increase your case acceptance, your practice is going to grow, everything's going to be good, all is well in the world. Well, we charted out case acceptance as it correlates to growth across our entire network of DSOs. 4 quadrants. We put in one quadrant, high growth, high case acceptance. Another quadrant, we put in high growth, low case acceptance, low growth, low case acceptance, and low growth, high case acceptance. Surprisingly, distribution across all 4 of those quadrants was surprisingly equal. As a standalone metric, case acceptance actually doesn't tell you a whole lot or predict what your growth is going to be. But there is something that does. And that something is the gap between case acceptance and case completion. So when you look at this gap, what we see is that practices that have no gap, everything that's accepted is completed, they actually don't grow. They shrink. And then practices that have a massive gap, 40% plus, they also shrink. Reasons for that could be not enough diagnosis, not enough treatment plan for those that have no gap. And the ones that have large gap have incredible operational inefficiencies. They're not able to get the patients back to the treatment that they've accepted. They're not completing those treatments. Somewhere in between ends up being the sweet spot where we see the opportunity still for growth. You're providing an excellent standard of care. Your operations surrounding the clinical excellence are also very, very strong. And you're able to complete the treatment on the patients that need to be completed. So I'll wrap with this. Here's 6 metrics that we tiered based on where we saw growth correlations across the network of Planet DDS, Denticon, and Cloud 9 clients. New patients per month, revenue per share that we talked about, that production volatility coefficient, OTC collection rates, so time of service payments. Dental has a problem collecting money. 3 different tiers here, the warning zone, target zone, where we see elite at 95% plus of collections at time of service. Your outstanding AR aged over 90 days, and then what your cancellation rates are. All of this data in a much more enriched fashion is available on the Planet DDS website. It is ungated. You don't need to exchange emails or anything else for it. We have the industry reports and the deep dive report, which is a 45-page report. I had 15 minutes to run you through some of the highlights, but our belief is that the fundamentals in dental still will. The gap is just getting wider now between those that are successful and those that are not. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and thank you very much for your time.